Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we're chatting with author, researcher, and founder of the Pine Barrens Institute, Adam Benedict. Adam is the author of Monsters in Print and Ghosts in Print. In these two books, he writes about incredible stories and encounters with the paranormal, taken straight from newspaper headlines from the 18 and 1900s. His books contain the facts as written, and he leaves it up to the reader to decide if these stories actually happened or not. You can find his books on Amazon, Kindle, or at pinebarrensinstitute.com. Hey, Adam, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. I think your books, are great because I've been doing some research for a book of my own and found some newspaper articles from the 1800s about some local stories in Tennessee of cryptids. So when I saw your books on Amazon, I was like, I want to talk to this guy because I think there's some interesting stories in newspapers for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy how many of these stories, relate to things that people, still talk about today or can link up with things that are going on today that, happened 100, 200 years ago that people don't even know they exist out there. They were written once and they were just lost to history until, someone ends up stumbling across them. And it just goes to show that people have been seeing weird things forever. It's not a new phenomenon. It might have had different names at the time, but this is a long ongoing thing. And, these stories prove that.
Yeah. And like I said in the intro, you founded the Pine Barrens Institute. And on that website and the blog, you kind of put a lot of stories up from throughout history about different cryptids and probably a lot of cryptids that I had never heard of. How did you come to start the Pine Barrens Institute website and get into cryptids?
It was a culmination of a long time coming, I should say. I remember being younger and I was always fascinated with this stuff, growing up at the time when Unsolved Mysteries was on and when the History Channel and Discovery Channel would play like old reruns of, Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of. You'd get the History's Mysteries on the History Channel, things like that, where they would touch on these various subjects, a lot of them dealing with cryptids or ghosts or aliens, things like that. But, the classic modern touching on it where it was more from a scientific perspective rather than a focus on like reality TV schlock type of formula.
Right.
So it really captured my attention as a kid, and I absolutely loved it. Whenever there was going to be a special on, or whenever there was a marathon or anything like that, I was glued to the TV. But as time went on, while it still held my attention, I found that it was a lot of the same stories. Like one show would do an episode on it, then you would catch another show doing the exact same episode, and they were kind of going off the same information that you could just find, and these shows would just kind of regurgitate them. I'm not saying that's a bad thing because, at the time, a lot of this stuff wasn't as mainstream as it is now. So the researchers at the time, unless they knew where to look, especially for those working in TV and stuff, they could only really take what was on the surface. But, being a kid at the time, I just wanted more and more and more. So then that led to, checking out books from the library, and when the scholastic book fairs would come around to school, I'd try and order the books the ones that they kept off in the back were just kind of included, but they weren't really, the kids weren't clamoring for those ones. Those were the ones I wanted. And I was trying to find all these stories of stuff that I hadn't heard before, the really weird ones. It might be really brief mentions and a tiny little blurb in a book of collected stories and stuff like that. But I absolutely loved those stories, the weird one-offs. And as that progressed, as I got older and older, I started really digging into where I could find more of these. And that would be, going to the library and checking the collections of old newspapers or magazines, back issues of Fate magazine, back issues of Argosy, and doing the classic, do you have old records of this? How far back do your collections go? Things like that. And then once everything started being digitized from a lot of universities getting grants to collect this history, it just opened up, so many more doors where then I started really focusing on, I wonder what's going around in my own state, because, you get a lot of famous things that happen along the East Coast, West Coast, down by the Florida Panhandle, things like that. But there wasn't really anything going on in the Midwest that people were talking about because, everyone considers it the flyover area. Nothing weird's going on down there. There's nothing really memorable.
Yeah.
So I started looking around for that stuff, and I was just kind of collecting it on my own. But then I just started getting a collection that was big enough where I figure, when I was younger and when I was getting into this, I would have loved being able to stumble across something like this. So, I decided I'm going to start something, because you never know who's going to find it and who's going to gain some sort of knowledge on it, whether good or bad. They agree with it, they don't agree with it. They're learning something new, and that's what I wanted when I was a kid, and that's what I wanted to put out there for others. And it just kind of grew from there. It really got focused on, specific areas and just the stuff that you don't hear about today. I just wanted to bring it back out of the past and again give it new life, and that's pretty much where we're at now.
And so with going through all these newspaper stories, what is your criteria for picking ones that you think could be more true or real, and it's not just kind of, for the day? Because newspapers back in the day were the entertainment. You didn't have radio and TV and all that stuff. So how do you pick the stories that you think are just more than entertainment, that there's actually some meat to the story?
Oh, to touch on what you just said, that's like, that nails it on the head. At that time, newspapers were the main source of information, entertainment, gossip, all that wrapped up into one. So any story you came across for a reader at that time, you're kind of rolling the dice on what you were going to get, and it was up to the reader to kind of pinpoint where on the truth scale that would lie. So for me now, I'm kind of doing the same thing. It's usually a topic or a phrase or something that will just come into my mind. Like, okay, this is what I'm going to search for this time. Kind of have to get in the mindset of they don't use words or descriptions that we would use today. So you have to link it back. What kind of descriptive terms, what kind of words would they use 150 years ago? So you kind of plug that in, and then you start going through the papers, and you're looking for not so much, you kind of learn like what papers were more of the leisurely papers, what papers were more had a political spin to them, things like that. And I kind of start focusing in on the ones that, don't have an obvious objective right from the front. This is the South's newspaper for, a group that leans this way, or the West Coast paper for, a political affiliation this way. So I kind of tend to steer away from those, because those usually have some sort of spin. From there, it is, when you find an article, it's how they write it. If it is extremely detailed and elaborate, they really go into just trying to cram as much information in it as they can. That's where it starts getting a little iffy, because even by today's standards, people have encounters with these things, whether they be considered monsters, ghosts, unusual sky phenomena, anything like that. A lot of details are very scant. So when you find those ones where people only give you a little bit of information, but they really focus on, other events in the area where not only, an example would be like Mrs. Johnson saw something in the woods, described it as looking like this. They believe it was this big. It was doing this around the property. Also within this area, Mr. Roberts reported 2 weeks ago seeing something similar. So it's very grounded. And those are the ones that I'm really, really looking for, the ones that there isn't sort of entertainment spin on them.
Yeah.
Not saying that the entertainment ones aren't enjoyable, because sometimes, you get a good sea monster story that all the bells and whistles, people come face to face with it, it drags ships down, things like that. But the ones that I'm really searching for are those ones where you can tell that the writer didn't even know what was going on, but they're reporting on it because they feel that people in the area should know about it. And those are the diamond in the rough ones. Those are the ones that are really fun to find.
And you find stories of some of the lesser known cryptids as well. People are, most people are familiar, especially with Bigfoot and then like Loch Ness Monster and even like the whole werewolf dogman thing has kind of become big in the paranormal in the past few years. What are some of the lesser known cryptids that you found multiple instances of that kind of describe the same creature that kind of isn't in the pop culture?
A lot of the ones that they could be, well, they're not so much in the pop culture as people would know them straight offhand, but they can be linked to creatures which we now have, a name for. Like a lot of these could be described similarly to modern day Bigfoot stories, but at the time, I'd run across a lot of instances of what they would call, like a cow man or a half man, half cow, half man, half bull, things like that. And it's not necessarily, an actual upright cow or anything like that. It was often described as, a large man-like thing that looked like it was covered in cow hide, or it was muscular and had the same type of hair, as a cow or a bull or a steer, things like that. And a lot of those could be described them as, they were kind of skulking around, wooded areas. They'd leave large tracks, make strange noise, incredibly fast, incredibly tall, things like that. They could be lumped in with modern day Bigfoot reports, but at the time, it was a thing all on its own, and you don't hear about that a lot anymore. Also, in that same vein, sea monsters or sea serpents, things like that, but a lot of the bulldog headed ones, there were a lot of lake monsters were often described as having heads similar to that of a bulldog, or a cow. Also, it has that same bone structure, it has that same outward appearance, but in modern times, you don't hear anything like that. You hear mostly things like, oh, it resembles a plesiosaur, or resembles, a zeuglodon or something like that. But those classic descriptions, it went away, as time progressed, and it's a shame because those were everywhere. That was like, back then you said sea serpent, that's what came to mind. You say sea serpent now, none of that stuff comes to mind. You say cowman, people have no idea what you're talking about. But when you start digging into it, it's like, okay, that something is there because it stood the test of time. The only thing that has changed really is the name. Thunderbirds are also a prime example. A lot of big bird sightings, but no one ever reported them as thunderbirds. They were just giant eagles or giant hawks, things like that. But looking at them now, it's like that's more than a giant eagle. That's a massive, massive bird that people shouldn't be seeing, but were.
Yeah, and I found some of that same stuff in the research here. I live in Tennessee, and so some of the research I've done here in Tennessee, you have the reports in the newspapers and of the Tennessee wild man, and it's very similar, like you're saying, to Bigfoot. But people were thinking it was, it just resembled a man with a lot of hair, and he was trying to snatch up women and stuff like that. And then some of those same reports, just described in a different way that you could kind of transfer over to Bigfoot and stuff like that today.
Yeah, you would get a lot of wild man reportings where, they're trying as hard as they can to make it seem like, oh, we found a hermit living in the woods. But when they get to the description of it, it's, he had, a beard down to his knees. His body was covered in hair. The only hair that wasn't on his body was on his face, but his skin was like gray, prominent eye bridge, left large tracks, extremely fast. And you're just like, this isn't a man, because these are things that humans shouldn't be able to do, that they're describing, but they didn't know what else to call it. Right. Because people are expanding into these heavily forested regions and stuff like that, and they were well aware of what they were going to encounter, bears and wolves, mountain lions, anything like that. So all they can go back on is like, well, it looked like a man, it walked like a man, and we know animals don't walk like that, so it has to be some sort of man, and we're going to assume he's probably crazy, and that's why he stays away from people.
Yeah.
If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck, and in this situation, it's not walking or talking or acting like a man. So it's kind of hard to say that it was. But then again, it's that, okay, now are they trying to sell papers, or are they trying to, get people to their area to bring in some dollars to help grow the town? Where is this going? And typically they would just end. You wouldn't know what would happen with them afterwards. You don't know if they ever caught them or encountered them again. They just leave it open, and then the next week, they have a different story, and they never touch on it again.
Yeah. And also, one of the things I've seen in some of the research I've done with older newspapers, they were really quick to put stories, because you also wrote a book about the ghost in print, and they were pretty quick to put ghost stories in there too, of so-and-so's house here, the specters were seen, and like all this type stuff as well.
Oh yeah, ghost stories back in the Victorian times and into the early 20th century were huge selling points, because it was that carry over from Europe when people would immigrate, because the supernatural and ghosts and all that were huge over there at the time, and people brought those with them. So it was a way for them to keep selling stories, because people love a good ghost story, and a lot of them up front are just absolutely ridiculous, and you can tell it's just good fun. Oh, we have some space on this page, let's run a ghost story for today. More than likely it was the reporter, hey, I heard this, or my parents told me this ghost story when I was younger, we'll run it. But then some of them, just like the cryptid sightings, they have a lot of reported quote unquote facts in the article that people still report experiencing today. Like the unexplained sounds of like breaking dishes or glass or things like that. The briefly catching glimpse of, a person walking through the yard and communicating, and all of a sudden you turn around and they're gone. Things like that, where it started breaking away from the storytelling aspect and more of the, okay, someone in the neighborhood is experiencing something weird, so let's give them an opportunity to tell their story, and then we'll move on. And that started happening, you could tell, more as it started getting closer to the 1900s, where it kind of lost that storytelling feel to it and started gaining that more supernatural tone to it, where it's like people are now reading it because, oh, they heard about the haunted house in the area and they want to know more about it.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, we kind of went through this period, especially what we call modern times in the 1900s, where we got back to this whole thing of where people didn't want to talk about ghosts or cryptids or UFOs. But you go back, like you're talking about the Victorian area and that type stuff, it was part of pop culture then. And it's kind of come back around to being pop culture now and okay to talk about. But 50 years ago, they would try to, put you in an insane asylum because you're, talking about seeing ghosts and seeing these crazy animals and stuff like that.
Especially because by doing so, you're also going against the dominant religion in the area, which usually incorporated these things as being somewhat related to the devil or being demons in a way. So to talk about it, well, a lot of people would actually fear for their soul in the afterlife if they've had an encounter with what can be described as a demonic, especially ghosts. It was a very, very touchy subject back at the time if you were talking about seeing ghosts, because people did believe that you were seeing or you were encountering the devil in some way. But as the religious fervor of the time started to loosen up and people started being able to kind of pull away from the religious hold that a lot of communities had back at that time, then it seemed like they were more willing to talk about it, and it lost that fear that a lot of people had, and it kind of brought on a little celebrity status that I live in the haunted house in the area, and people are flocking to see it. Charging people a dime to come in and see the ghost in your house became less of something to be afraid of and more of a financial opportunity.
Yeah, and well, back then, I mean, you kind of had to capitalize on anything to make money. You get a lot of farmers and stuff like that, and so yeah, they would try to capitalize off that little bit of fame that they had.
Totally.
What are some of the weirder stories that you put in the book that you believe might have had some validity to them, even though they were kind of weird and kind of out there?
There's so many to choose from that come across as weird. out of the gate, but then kind of have a little bit of truth to them. A lot of the ones that I feel probably have some sort of truth to them involve cargo or passenger ships that would span between Europe and North America, and that goes for both ghosts and cryptids as well, because a lot of this stuff, they would be able to link it back to captains who you could search up now, and they were real people. All the information that they put in the article can be linked back 90% of the time to, okay, this person really was a captain, the ship really did go this route they were talking about. And these people are going on record, and back at that time they would run their full name. They'd run where they worked. A lot of times they'd run where they even lived. They'd give you the street and the address and everything. So these people are going on record talking about that they had an encounter with a sea serpent, or their ship was reported to be haunted. And these people would come by and they'd be like, yeah, we just pulled into port. Here's the coordinates of where this has happened. A monster came up and, kind of was attacking our ship, or it was following our ship. It was thinking we were a threat. We ended up shooting at it, or we rammed through it and actually cut it in half. And a lot of those seem crazy at first. Like, there's no way that a ship cut through a sea serpent. But then it's like, well, we cut through things nowadays too, and you still get reports where people are like, yeah, we encountered something weird. Or like the Navy submarine, or the Navy ship, I'm sorry, that was reported to be attacked by what can be described as a kraken, where they found the suction cup marks, and, like, I believe some of the hooks from the tentacles still embedded in the radar covering of these ships. So it right then and there, it's like, okay, this stuff is still being reported too. So maybe they did, ram through a sea serpent and they tried to drag it back to shore, but they couldn't because, it was too heavy. Or maybe these crew really did see the ghost of a fallen crewmate who kept the ship on course while everyone was asleep, when they're pretty sure that they should have crashed in the middle of the night.
Yeah. To have that verifiable evidence, like you were saying, with you can trace it back to the captain of the ship and the exact route. Yeah, it lends a little more validity to the claims, and that you could actually go back and research those people, and it's just not some fantastical story with made up characters.
Especially when they give the exact coordinates, and you can plug those into the internet now, and it'll bring up Google Maps, so it'll show you exactly where it took place, and from there you can, okay, just an example, around like the Cape of Good Horn or something like that. Is there any historical monster sightings here? And the countries that are in line with this route, are there any monster reportings? And you can link it into there, and it's like, if there's a good historical base from that region, and then you can link it to this, where this captain says we did encounter something, it only strengthens that believability factor. But to get that, you have to be willing to put in the work to search for it, because a lot of people at face value, they'll just laugh and they'll scoff and they'll be like, no, that's not true, and they'll move on.
Right.
But by doing that, they're missing out on this treasure trove that you can uncover of, this one incident opens this door to this umbrella of, weird stories within it. It's just, you got to take that time to look for it.
Yeah. With doing all this research of the cryptids, what do you think about cryptids, and what cryptids do you believe are real based on a lot of the claims and the research you've done?
My relationship with cryptids, it ebbs and flows. I can definitely say one day I'm all for them. The next day all of it is garbage. I can't settle on one belief in it, and which I think is good, because the minute you lock yourself in to, I either believe in something or I don't believe in it, you've now you're not going to advance anymore. You're not going to learn anything. You're not going to be able to grow as a researcher or investigator, anything like that. Once you lock yourself into something, you're essentially done. So my daily belief in it is constantly changing. Do I believe, in a lot of reports of, like dogmen or upright canines, things like that? Not really, no. Wendigos, shapeshifters, anything like that. It's very difficult for me to believe in. Once you start getting into the supernatural side of it,
Yeah.
It's difficult to really believe in it. And it's not because like I think it's ridiculous. It's just where my train of thought is. It's more grounded in flesh and blood. Anything with modern physics of today, it's governed all by the same thing. So I'm looking for that. Is it flesh and blood? Could it be flesh and blood? And then from there is, where I go if I believe it or not. Along with that, I do believe that a good vast majority, if cryptids were to be true, it would lie in sea serpents or sea monsters or sea dragons, whatever you want to call them. And some areas of the world, not all of them, could have, a very small population of an undiscovered large mammal. Not going to say ape, not going to say, a hybrid of anything like that. A large mammal of something. We don't know what it is yet. We haven't been able to categorize it, but it can't be everywhere. When I say that, I'm looking at places like Alaska or like the really wilderness areas of Canada, things like that. Australia as well. There's a good chance because it's so large and it's vastly underpopulated in many areas that something could be there, but it's really it's really got to check a lot of boxes for me to start being okay. This could be real.
I'm kind of the same thought as you. I'm kind of on the fence with most of them. Like you were talking about dogmen and wendigos and stuff like that. And like you're saying, like some sort of hominid that we haven't discovered. I think there is a possibility there. And then when you get into the paranormal researchers, especially with Bigfoot, Sasquatch type phenomena, you get the supernatural camp who believe it's some kind of supernatural creature, and then you get the camp that it's something flesh and blood. And I think that goes along with a bunch of cryptids. I think dogmen is probably another one of those that kind of saddle, depending on who you talk to in the paranormal field, whether they think those things are supernatural or they're actual physical beings. And then you get into Mothman, you also get other people that think it's, alien type creature. And so, yeah, just you kind of got to make up your own mind with a lot of the stuff about what you believe and what you don't.
And by saying stuff like that, you can rustle a lot of feathers in a lot of camps by you draw some hard lines in the sand when you go like, oh, well, Mothman couldn't be real because we don't have historical or fossil record of it being real. It wouldn't be able to have magic powers. It wouldn't, and I'm just throwing Mothman out there as an example.
Yeah.
But that would make a lot of people mad. So in my personal opinion, the way I look at it as, if you've exhausted every avenue to go down to prove that these things are flesh and blood and they behave as known flesh and blood creatures, you remove all that, you cannot place them in that camp anymore. They'd be no longer within the realms of cryptozoology. In my mind, they should go into a new category called ParaCryptozoology, where now you're starting to look into, okay, now people are saying that these things have some sort of abilities. Once those abilities come into play, they can't be cryptids anymore. A cryptid is described, the official description is it's an undiscovered animal. It's not an undiscovered magical animal. So then that's where you start, okay, we're gonna separate this now. We're looking at something completely different. This is out of my wheelhouse. This is where other people step in who have a broader and more, specialized area of expertise that I'd be the first to admit it. I don't know any of that stuff. Like, I can't begin to wrap my mind around it.
Right.
But when you start bringing that stuff up, a lot of people, they get really mad because you start challenging what they've locked themselves into to believe.
Yeah, and I think just people in general, we like to put things in boxes and have things all tied up. And I don't think cryptids or the paranormal world is that organized. Because there's so much we don't understand, I don't think that we can start to put these things in boxes and think that we understand that, okay, well, Bigfoot fits here and Mothman fits here. And it's hard to do that, especially with things that you can't prove exist.
Oh, for sure. It's very difficult. And, once people accept that, they're probably not going to be able to get an answer that they like, and they're going to have to shift over to something different. That's where that then you start getting the separation in the camps. You get the the woo side, and you get the alien side, and you get this and this and this, where it's like, okay, we don't need different sides, but we can have different areas of focus. Once it leaves this one, now we start studying up on this to see if maybe there's anything in this one. It's it's far from the golden age of cryptozoology back in the 50s and 60s. When you got like Cyber Sanderson and Hubelmans and people like that who are just looking for straight up undiscovered animals.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of red tape you got to go through to be to get any sort of headway in any of this now.
Yeah. Have you ever had any personal encounters with the cryptids or with ghosts or anything paranormal?
Yeah, I have actually had an encounter with what I can only describe as a sea serpent, and the reason for that is because, or a sea monster, and the only reason I call it that is because I haven't figured out what it is yet. But it was witnessed by me and my brother and my sister-in-law. It took place in 2014. We were in Florida, the Atlantic Ocean. We're hanging out. We're walking out to a sandbar, and I'm 6'2", and the water it's up to my chest. It's not far below my shoulder. So we're in pretty deep water, and we're going out to a sandbar, and we're kind of throwing a ball back and forth as we're walking. Water is completely dark. You cannot see the bottom, but you can feel the bottom, and then it starts kind of pulling away a bit until the sand starts coming back up towards the sandbar. And we're throwing a ball back and forth, and my brother kind of throws it a little bit far, and I have to turn to get it. And as I'm turning, he's kind of standing there and he's looking, and then I caught sight of it as well. The water directly in front of us is churning from below, which was very odd. And immediately you get scared because there's something under the water that you're
Right.
you're not expecting to see, and all of a sudden from this churning, this thing snaked up, and it was moving in our direction, and it snaked up out of the water, but you could tell that it was aware of us in some way, that there was something in its way, and it curled back over itself. You could see its body physically move and curl back over itself and slide back under the water the other way. It was extremely wide. Best way to describe it is it was about as thick as a plastic drum barrel, like one of them big blue rain barrels.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was very wide like that. It was dark grayish black on top. It was kind of whitish gray on the bottom, and it's speckled in between the two colors. It was perfectly silent. There was no dorsal fin seen. There was no tail fin splash. There was no flippers, no head, no nothing. It was just this giant snake-like body that was probably 5 to 6 feet away from us. You could feel the water move with it, and it took off the other way and was completely gone.
Wow.
We stood there kind of in disbelief, and I remember turning and I looked at him, and I was like, you saw that, right? And he's like, yeah, what was that? And my sister-in-law was behind him, and she goes, do you guys know what that thing was? And we were just standing there in the middle, of the ocean, and finally was like, let's go back to shore. Like, let's get out of the water. And in that moment, when you read these stories where people said they just froze, they didn't know what to do, because everyone's like, well, why didn't, for, on land or sightings of these, people are like, why don't you just take a picture of it? Why didn't you pull your phone out? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Yeah.
In that moment, like, I didn't think of anything. It was just a shock of, I shouldn't have seen that. Like, that's not something I've ever seen before. And, immediately that day, started looking up, like, what kind of aquatic creatures are within the Atlantic Ocean, description, sizes, things like that. Nothing was coming up that fit this classification. I've talked to a lot of people. A lot of people would say, "Oh, you saw an oarfish." Well, I didn't see an oarfish because it looked nothing like an oarfish, and an oarfish doesn't move like that. The spine of an oarfish has spine-like barbs that would kind of flap in the water. Not like flap like they're doing it, but they kind of sway with the water, and it's more thin and it's more silvery gray. This didn't match this. It didn't match a dolphin because it didn't move like a dolphin, didn't match a shark, didn't match a turtle, nothing like that. So I don't know what I saw. The best I can describe it is, like I said, is a monster until I figure it out. The only thing that's really come close is there is a video shot by a couple in Florida, and I want to say, don't hold me to it because I can't remember if this is the correct video or if this is the name of another one. It's called like the sand sable sea serpent video or sea monster video, and what these people filmed looked almost identical to what we saw, and that's the closest I've come to actually seeing something reminiscent of what we saw. To this day, I'm still trying to figure out what it was, but I can see it in my mind as clear as day. I don't think I'll ever forget this sighting or experience. And what made it more burned into my brain is actually being in the water with it.
Yeah, I can see where that would be terrifying because the way you describe the water where you really can't see the bottom either. So yeah, I'd be trying to tread water and get back to the beach.
What made it more frightening, like once you get out of that situation and you realize, oh, wow, like that could have been extremely dangerous, and that goes for any type of encounter like this, whether it's in the woods or it's, in the water or it's in, a cornfield at night, anything like that, is because you're so unprepared for it. And especially this thing, how silent it was. If we wouldn't have seen the water moving, we would have never even known it was there.
Yeah.
Like it was just there, but it's like it didn't exist there because it was making no noise at all. And the one thing I thought of later on is that classic story of the Pensacola sea serpent attack that ran in Fate magazine back in the day, where the kid or the teenager claims that him and his friends were attacked by a monster in Pensacola, Florida, and it killed 4 of them, and he was the only survivor. Like that's the story that I kept thinking of. Like, oh man, like I could have been one of those stories that people like doubt to this day.
Yeah, and the ocean kind of captivates imagination when it comes to like the sea serpents and the monsters and stuff, because there's so much of it we haven't explored, and it's such a foreign environment to humans because we're not really made. We've come up with submarines and scuba gear and that type of stuff to try to conquer that environment, but there's still many places we've never been in the vast ocean of our planet.
Yeah, and once we step foot in that, we're the aliens, on another world in that situation. We are not equipped in any way to survive there without, artificial means. And it's, you take yourself, from the top of the food chain on land and you put yourself in there and you're just, you're nothing.
Right.
But we're compelled to constantly go into it.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that has also, kept sea monster stories alive, because we haven't mastered any control over the water. And, as people, we're compelled to be the dominant force wherever we're at, just to say that we've mastered what can't be mastered. And in this situation, we can't do it. And to think that there could be something out there 10 times bigger and stronger than us in any way that we can't capture or control or train or anything like that, it makes this constant drive to find it enduring. It's timeless.
Yeah, and to think that we've only discovered, and I guess this probably 100 years ago would have been a cryptid, but like giant squids, we've only discovered that they really exist in the past 50 years, and these things are massive.
And I believe the first video of it was only in like 2007 by that Japanese research team who actually caught it on camera. And then Not long after that, there was that one that showed up in a bay, I believe in Japan as well, and that dude just jumped in the water to film it. Then along with the giant squid, then we have the colossal squid, which is, at times even bigger than that. And, what's bigger than the colossal squid that we haven't found yet?
Right.
And people can't say, oh, that's not, there'd be nothing bigger than that. Well, we don't know.
Yeah. And then also have a fossil record of these, megalodon sharks that dwarf anything we see in the ocean nowadays. I mean, even the megalodon would even dwarf like a humpback whales and stuff that are the size of school buses. And so just with having so much area that you just can't have eyes on or monitor all the time, there's so many things that could be out there, especially in the ocean.
And it's crazy when you say, like dwarfs a blue whale and things like that, because when you say blue whale, the image of a blue whale will pop into your mind. Everyone knows what a blue whale looks like. But when you see like a scaled replica, like in a museum, or you're lucky enough to see one of these things actually out in the water on like a whale tour, to actually see how big it is, it's mind bending to know that things can get this big, and then to know that there was things bigger than it.
Right.
It's just it's terrifying and it's humbling all at the exact same time. Like when you're a little kid and you see a dinosaur skeleton for the first time, you're like, holy crap, like that thing walked around.
Yeah, and I've been out on boats, like fishing boats and stuff like that, out in the water where you can't see land. And I think that is the same. It's kind of mind-bending if you think about it. You're this little speck in this giant ocean. And even like going to the mountains, you kind of realize that there's things so much bigger than us that it goes back to what you were talking about, where we think we're the top of the food chain everywhere, until you go into an environment like that, like the ocean, where you're definitely not.
Yeah, and that applies to like those heavily wooded areas, like in Canada and in Alaska and things like that, where they tell you, you got to be constantly on guard. Don't go out alone. It's best to go with, a group or at least two people, so you can be watching your direction the whole time, because you don't know when, a grizzly bear is going to come charging out at you, one of the largest, North American predatory animals. It will catch you by surprise. You can't see that far into the woods, but this thing is watching you. And then when you hear the reports of people who have camped up there and who have worked up there saying, there's this thing that's walking around my cabin at night. There's this thing that's leaving these big prints. There's this thing that's, getting into my shed. And, when they tell you, I've lived here my entire life and I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
That's when you start looking at going, okay, there's some credence to this, where this could be real, but we just don't know it because people, they want to scoff at it right away because of, where we're currently at in this state of cryptozoology and Fortean phenomena, where a lot of people think of it as a joke and they don't believe that at one point it was a serious, almost, I don't want to say pseudoscience, I want to say almost science, because a lot of people did give it credence for a while, that something could become of it, but then unfortunately it kind of tanked in its credibility. But at one point, this was scientifically looked at a lot of the time.
Yeah. And going back, I mean, you can look at maps too from sailors from a couple hundred years ago, and they've got these drawings of, there's this type of sea serpent that has been seen in this area of the ocean. And then you've got the, kraken in this area of the ocean. And they actually put these on charts and maps to warn other sailors of the dangers of going through those waters.
Yeah. And it's funny when you say that, because you look at, if you watch a lot of documentaries or something about this time, you'll always get that one person who's like, oh, they put those depictions there because they needed to fill the map, or, they didn't know what was there and they felt it could be dangerous, so they wanted to just warn people. But it's like, how do you know?
Right.
Someone could have had that off encounter or seen something that, was monstrous in size and terrifying, and maybe did interact with their boat in some way where they're like, okay, we don't know what it looked like. We know it had this general shape. Put it right here. just so other people, when we come back in 5 years, we remember where it was at.
Yeah, it's a huge world, and like we've been talking about, we think that we've dominated it, and we really haven't. There's so many of these areas on land and in the water, and even getting into like the Great Lakes, where they have on Lake Champlain, they have the Champ Lake Monster, and these are, I mean, like the Lake Champlain, Lake Erie, they're basically inland oceans. They're ginormous, and it's just like going into the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. And these places are so vast that things could live there that we haven't discovered.
Just like up here by Wisconsin, we got Lake Michigan on one side and we got Lake Superior up at the top, and Lake Superior being the biggest of all the Great Lakes in both in terms of water volume and depth and stuff like that. And there is a long history and legends of something strange being seen in there, with the rock carvings and like not a serpent type, but a large aquatic thing, maybe a giant fish or kind of like a dinosaur looking. I don't want to say plesiosaur or anything like that, but dinosaur in the scale of its size and its what its skin is described as looking at like. But that's been seen for a long, long time, and you get these carvings of it that can be found in these petroglyphs along the lake. And this is a lake that it swallowed ships, and it still swallows ships, and some of those ships are never found.
Yeah.
So what else is down there that we can't find or can't see, or for some reason is smarter than we are when it comes to getting close to it? Anything could be down there, because it is a sea in the middle of a continent. It's just as dangerous as the actual ocean.
Yeah, all this stuff just fascinates me, and I love talking about it and just getting different people's takes on it. And like I'd said before, I love how you went in your books to these old news reports to show that it's been around for hundreds of years, that these stories of cryptids and ghosts and monsters has been part of the human experience in this country for hundreds of years, as far back as, with newspapers being written about these stories. And I just think it's awesome to have you put together those books and all the stuff in one place so people can check it out and see the history goes a lot further than what we think nowadays of Bigfoot and all this other stuff, and how it was popular in pop culture and in the Victorian area.
Yeah, I can definitely say one of the big things in my mind when I decided I wanted to do this, and I don't think of it as like being an author or writing a book or anything like that. In my mind, I'm just I'm compiling all this stuff into one place as a research tool for other people, which is why I made the decision that I wasn't going to put any spin or personal opinion in this at all. It's a collected volumes of research for people, so they have it available to them.
Yeah.
Because I like the idea of knowing that this article, if it came out 170 years ago, it legit could have been not read or hidden away for those 170 years, and be able to bring it back out and be like, here, everyone, look at this. This happened. Link it up with something else. Figure out what it was. Please do this thing justice and let it help you in some way. That's just what I wanted to do. And I'm glad that people are enjoying it and actually using it in that way. Because I've actually talked to a lot of people who have said, I was researching this thing, or I was looking into this legend and stories, and I didn't know about this one, but it's exactly what I've been researching, and it just helped expand that legend that I'm trying to tell people. And it's extremely useful. Like, that's what I wanted to do from the beginning, and that's what I wish I had when I was a little kid, really getting into this.
Yeah. And to bring some more evidence and validity to some of the claims that, some of these similar claims have been around for hundreds of years. And it's not just, things that are popping up in pop culture now, but it's just, stories and encounters that have been around for a long time.
Yes. It's just, I tell people this all the time. It's like, if the history is there, it's harder to scoff at it.
Yeah.
And this proves that people have been seeing weird things forever. So maybe look at it, with a more serious tone, and you might just, uncover something that you weren't expecting to uncover.
Yeah. All right. Well, everybody can find your books on Amazon and Kindle or at your website, Pine Barrens Institute. And everybody should go out and check out pinebarrensinstitute.com. You've got a lot of great stuff on there, and you keep adding new articles on there on the blog part of it. And there's lots of other great content on there as well.
Thank you. I can say that the blog articles have slowed down for the time being, and they will be pretty slow for the next few months, because book number 3 is in the process of being finished. That one is called Oddities in print. That's going to be dealing with a lot of unexplained aerial phenomenon people have reported seeing, strange events like spontaneous combustion, plants that were said to have magical healing properties or being mystical, a lot of fun lusus natura, or what's known as freaks of nature, half man, half animals, stuff like that. This is the one that couldn't fit in the category of either ghosts or monsters. That's what we're going for with this one. And that will be out hopefully this fall sometime.
Awesome. I look forward to checking that out. Thank you so much, Adam, for coming on and chatting with me today. I've really enjoyed it, and learning about all the cryptid stuff is always fun.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening today. And as always, stay safe out there. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
To the end of the line. Whoa. I can feel you as you pass the other side.